the temptation, because, and this is actually like a Western chauvinist impulse, is to believe that we can bring democracy abroad. In reality, democracy is a set of, in addition to government policies, civic tendencies that have to emerge from desires the population has. A population that is constantly under threat of starvation, war, whatever else, they tend not to care as much about democracy. First of all, there's a lot of infrastructure democracy needs, and second of all, democracy tends to be rhetorically weak. The strongest arguments, especially for desperate people, tend to come from strongmen, whether they be, secular or religious. Religious strongmen, a pretty common trend in the Middle East, Assad being a secular version, but that's I guess, a sort of like a default position that a lot take to. Now, generally speaking, areas of the world that are more stable are more democratic. Here's a good example. Iran actually has a pretty robust civic democracy. Iran is not a democracy, but there are a lot of people in Iran who want a democracy. If Iran had a kind of like internal revolt, if people were killed, or if there was a restructuring, or some people were sent upstate, to go live out the rest of their lives on a farm, I think that Iran could actually move into a pretty functional democracy. I think the people of Iran want democracy, not a warlord. I think the people in some other countries like Afghanistan, to an extent Iraq, because Iraq's democracy was one we kind of had to build up with chewing gum and playing cards. Yemen, a lot of other countries in the region. There are regional issues which in a material sense predispose people towards non-democratic solutions to their problems. Sometimes it's foreign influence. In fact, often it is, with the authoritarian wing being backed financially. Sometimes it's because the civil infrastructure just doesn't exist. Sometimes it's because the people don't want it. Us arrogant Westerners often forget this, but the desire to live in a democracy is a very recent tendency. For most of human history, your main concern was, am I going to get food on the table tonight? Will I be able to earn the coin that I need to provide for myself and my children? Will I be able to live a nice life in a little hut? And whether or not you get to participate in some big process where millions of people vote and a leader is chosen, it's relatively abstract. The more complicated society gets, the less abstract it gets. In a relatively modern, complicated society like Iran, democracy is comprehensible because it relates to all of the numerous ways in which somebody interacts with society. But if you live in a rural village in Afghanistan, how much does democracy mean to you? Really think about it. You're talking about people who literally herd goats, okay? And then you come over to them and you say, hey, we've got this experimental new process where you get to be involved in the election of people you've never heard of in a place that you've never been to, and they'll be able to enforce policies that don't affect you. How much do you think they care? Realistically and historically, not quite as much, because it's abstract. Society is abstract. When you're out in the sticks, when you're less developed. This is, by the way, why suburbs are anti-democratic. Suburbs, and I would say a larger extent, rural communities, make people forget what society can do for them because they all lived in little moated castles of their own. It's meant to insulate them from society, so they forget what society can do for a person. So they live austere individualists, much to the detriment of other people and themselves, by the way, in the long run, as society rots out from the core. So the desire that a lot of you Western chauvinists have is to make the Middle East a democracy. Well, we couldn't. We couldn't really do it with Iraq. And by the way, with Afghanistan, look at what our efforts did. All we did was prop up a bunch of, pseudo-organized militaristic pedophiles who all fell apart or ran the moment we left. The Taliban swarmed in once we weren't protecting them. What could we have done to build a democracy in Afghanistan? My answer is this: nothing. There was not a single thing on God's earth we could have done. Not a single fucking thing we could have done. Magic? But magic's not real. The only thing that can make Afghanistan a democracy is this: they have to be controlled by the Taliban or by another similar group. It has to be them. An insurgency with local power and local influence. And the people of Afghanistan have to suffer. They have to suffer material conditions which will allow their nation to develop in a way that makes them more amicable towards democratic reform. But they're a while away from that. I know that really sucks, by the way. I know that's like mean, but I also legitimately think it's the actual only thing that can be done. Now, their suffering can be alleviated. I have recommendations. Treat the Taliban like the legitimate government of Afghanistan. Try to incorporate them into international efforts to provide aid, humanitarian aid, economic investment. Treat them like a regular government, because they are, you know? That's what they are. The nicer things get in Afghanistan, the more money and resources people there have, the more likely material conditions are to develop in a way that allows them to develop the civil society that democracy requires. This is basic Marx, by the way. You know? That's why sanctioning tends to be bad. All sanctioning does is prolong these conditions by keeping these countries in a state of deprivation, prolonging the idea that a warlord or a dictator is necessary, because they are, they're the only one who can fight back against the tyrannical West for sanctioning them. You know, it just doesn't tend to work. It further isolates countries. But I'll tell you, as Afghanistan gets more developed, wealthier, gets more investment, more legitimate international trade, you start to see a continuance of the process that's already happening. What's been happening to those Taliban insurgents? Haven't we seen articles on them on stream? These guys used to live in caves in the mountains, taking pot shots at ANA soldiers. What are they doing now? They're in Kabul doing paperwork, because it turns out that there's a pretty big difference between taking a country and running it. Now these Taliban insurgents, who are being radicalized by the military circumstances of their jobs, the conditions were keeping them fierce like lions, but now they're office workers. Do you understand how this shift actually moves Afghanistan in a positive direction? Now, the Taliban are monstrous, and the way they're treating the people of Afghanistan, especially the women, very, very, very bad. But if you believe this is the only road that a country can go to meaningfully develop in a positive way, the goal then is to facilitate these transitions in a way that makes that negative treatment of women less and less desirable. Even noted shithole Saudi Arabia has lightened up on its anti-woman laws. Saudi Arabia has had to dial back on a lot of stuff to accommodate the enormous amount of tourism and mutual international investment they get. Because, as it turns out, it's kind of difficult to be a hub of global trade and a tourist center when women are subjected to, like, incredibly punitive second-class citizenship. There's more you have to put up with. Now, I don't think that Saudi Arabia is, like, a great example of how positive change can happen or fucking whatever. I'm just saying that engagement with the rest of the world is a good way to keep those countries from remaining their worst selves. Does that make sense? Like, we all understand, right? This is very basic material condition stuff. We can't impose democracy. What we can do is identify the conditions that will increase the likelihood of a civil society being developed, and we can do our best to facilitate that positively. Now, with Saudi Arabia, for example, there are lots of things we're doing to actually worsen the conditions over there, because we aren't just engaging with Saudi Arabia in the international community. We are full-on allies with and defenders of their feudal regime. So in a lot of cases, this is a kind of foreign engagement that is not hastening their transition to democracy. We're doing the opposite. We're forestalling it by backing the House of Saud and protecting them. This is like a petrostate thing, you know. But on a basic level, I think international engagement, investment, care, diplomacy, these things do tend to hasten a country's movement in a good direction. Copium. Really, Renikun? Doesn't the solution also apply to Palestine and Hamas? No? No, it has nothing to do, no relationship. If it didn't work in making China more democratic, it did? Do you know what China was like in the 70s before, like, the Dengist reforms? Do you have any idea what, like, okay, prior to them, like, properly opening up to the world, you know, trade with Nixon, blah, blah, Dengist reforms, like, global trade, China was a lot worse in a lot of ways Yeah, them trying to become like a hub of global trade and engagement has definitely led to them being, you know, in some ways a little, slightly less bad. China under Xi is a lot worse now, though. Yeah, I'm not saying that countries that trade with other countries can't become fascist. I'm just saying that, generally speaking, I think there's a positive trend here, you know? I feel like chat is going, like, right now, all you guys are going to do is, like, try to find a counterexample, and then I, like, explain it, and I'm going to do that, like, 50 times or whatever. If anyone disagrees with what I have to say, then fine, go invade Iraq again. Go have fun, whatever. Like, my arguments, right, the fact that I'm right is written in history now, okay? We tried this. We've tried this multiple times. We tried to do this with the Shah back in Iran. We've tried this in Afghanistan. The Soviets tried it in Afghanistan. We tried it in Iraq. Like, every time and time again, material conditions, folks. Democracy isn't something you just impose on a country. Democracy is something that has to develop. It has to blossom from a set of conditions that exist prior. You have to build to it, much as you have to build to socialism. You can't just make socialism happen. You have to build to socialism. It happened in Rojava. What are you even arguing against? What, Rennie-kun, you were the person who said copium. You're not engaging with me, fairly. You don't need to bring democracy to Rojava. Goddamn, they have democracy, for fuck's sake, Vaush. I'm not talking about Rojava. I'm talking about the broader way in which you stabilize the Middle East. That's what I'm talking about here. I'm not just talking about, like, having a little pocket of socialist Kurds. I'm talking about stability in the Middle East, you know? And if you want stability in the Middle East, you need interconnected, diplomatically engaged democracies. Or at the very least, you know, you need robust civil societies that want peace from their governments. You want people to have enough... Hey, quick question, by the way. Why do you think Iran relies on funneling resources to militia groups and doesn't use its military directly? It's not just because they don't want direct conflict, because there are plenty of ways the Iranian military could flex its power in the region without, like, invoking an invasion of Iran, right? A lot of it is also because the people of Iran don't want war. The people of Iran don't want to see their children die in conflict. They don't want to see them, you know, their corpses on news reports. They don't want to feel as though their economy is being committed to, you know, the war effort. The people of Iran are stable and prosperous enough that they want peace. They want to develop peace. They want that process. You know, we need populations in the Middle East that are themselves capable of this. Chat's bipolar today. Yeah, I agree with you on trying diplomacy, but what do we do when diplomacy fails, like it arguably did with Russia and China? Sorry, but a huge part of that is on us, okay? America, mostly American conservatives, have been posturing antagonism with China for decades now. Like, America, literally, like, America has been doing the whole, like, China, our great enemy. Like, totally fucking unnecessary, but conservatives have used them as a great threat across the sea. In the absence of the Soviet Union, conservatives needed another big enemy to fearmonger over with economic development. So we exacerbated that massively. And with Russia, we literally, like, won the Cold War and then raped them with the fucking shock therapy economic bullshit. And like, we did so many things wrong with Russian diplomacy on so many levels, you know? Like a lot of this is on us. We didn't do diplomacy, and a lot of that is because America is fucking arrogant and chauvinist. We did the same thing with Russia and China that we did with Iraq and Afghanistan. We were arrogant. We assumed that we ruled the world, which I suppose we do, but we don't rule all of it. And as a consequence of that, we can do whatever we want, and we can, like, treat them as our playthings and not expect consequences down the line. It's sickening.